My family laughed at me when I announced I was going to start a business. While my husband walked away from a solid paycheck to stand beside me, we survived on instant noodles for 2 straight years. And today, we closed a deal that sold our company for $50 million. My parents are now asking me for loans. But I need to rewind, because the laugh is actually where this whole story begins. And it wasn't the kind of laugh you're probably imagining right now. It wasn't cruel, not exactly. It was Thanksgiving, 2017. My mother had just set down her famous sweet potato casserole, the one with the little marshmallows on top that absolutely nobody enjoys, but absolutely nobody has the nerve to say anything about. And somewhere between bites of turkey, I mentioned casually that I was thinking about leaving my corporate job to start my own company. The table went completely silent, maybe 2 seconds. Then my father made this sound, this tiny exhale through his nose, almost like a half cough. My mother glanced at him, and then they both just it wasn't mean. It was the laugh of two people who genuinely believed they were listening to something absurd, like I'd announced I was training for the Olympics or relocating to Antarctica. My sister Sandra didn't laugh. She was cutting her son's turkey into tiny pieces, and she just kept cutting, eyes down, and quietly asked, "What kind of company?" I said meal prep kits, but different from anything already out there. My dad said, sarcastically, "Like Mealbox?" I said, "Not like Mealbox." He said, "How is it not like Mealbox?" And that was the beginning of the longest argument of my adult life, an argument that technically never ended because we never actually resolved it. We just stopped talking about it. My dad turned back to the football game on TV. My mother started collecting plates while half of us were still eating, which is her particular way of ending a conversation. My name is Dana Kovalechik. I was 31 years old that Thanksgiving. I'd been grinding away in commercial real estate for 6 years, first as an analyst, then in leasing, then in some blurred hybrid role they invented so they could dump more work on me without the inconvenience of actually promoting me. I was good at it. I was not passionate about it. I know that word gets thrown around constantly, but I'd sit at my desk on the 14th floor of a building on Wacker Drive in Chicago, staring at lease abstracts, and I'd feel this heaviness in my chest that I understand now was just the slow, creeping recognition that this was going to be my life for 40 more years. My husband, Marcus, was an engineer at a major tech company. He made a comfortable 6-figure salary that we always rounded up in conversation because it sounded cleaner. He was the kind of person who read technical documentation on weekends purely out of curiosity. Not manuals exactly, but he'd spend a Saturday afternoon reading through FDA food labeling guidelines just because he wanted to understand how nutrition panels worked. And I think, honestly, that's where the idea was actually born. We were lying in bed one night, him on his laptop scrolling through allergen labeling guidelines, and he said, almost to himself, "You know what the real problem with meal kits is? They're designed by food people. Nobody is thinking about the logistics." I sat straight up. He didn't even notice, he just kept scrolling. "Marcus." "Hmm? Say that again?" He looked up at me over his reading glasses. He was 33 but wore reading glasses like a 60-year-old university professor, and said, "What, the logistics thing?" "Yeah, talk to me." "I mean, it's obvious. The margins are disastrous because the fulfillment model is disastrous. Cold chain, last mile delivery, all of it. If you actually fixed the supply chain side, you could undercut every competitor in the market." And then he went right back to reading. I lay there staring at the ceiling for about 45 minutes. There was a water stain up there shaped like Rhode Island. I remember that. I remember the sound of his steady breathing and the faint noise of our neighbor's television through the wall. That was March 2017. By the time Thanksgiving arrived and I opened my mouth at my parents' dinner table, Marcus and I had already been developing this idea for 8 months. We had a full business plan. We had projected unit economics. Marcus had built a prototype cold pack system in our garage that kept food at safe temperature for 36 hours instead of the industry standard 14. We weren't daydreaming, we were building. But I hadn't told my family any of that. Why? Because I think I was afraid of them taking it seriously. As long as the idea stayed theoretical, nobody could tell me it was going to fail. The moment I said it out loud at that table, it became real. And real things can break. After Thanksgiving, I never brought it up again with my parents. I simply went ahead and did it. And that is maybe the most honest thing I can tell you about myself. I don't process major decisions out loud. I make them in silence, and then I present them as facts. Marcus says it is simultaneously my greatest strength and my most maddening quality. My therapist, I started seeing one later during what we privately called the noodle years, said it was a control mechanism. Probably both are true. In January 2018, I submitted my resignation at the real estate firm. My manager, a woman named Carolyn, who I genuinely liked and respected, sat me down in her office and said, "Dana, I won't pretend I understand this decision, but I respect it. Don't burn through your savings in the first 6 months." I told her I wouldn't. I did. The company was called Harvest Table. The concept was straightforward, at least in my head. Instead of shipping individual meal kits directly to individual homes, which is insanely expensive when you actually study the numbers, we'd partner with local grocery chains to serve as pickup points. You'd order online, we'd deliver in bulk to the store, and you'd collect your kit during your regular grocery run. We eliminated last-mile residential delivery entirely, which is where every meal kit company was hemorrhaging money. Marcus designed the packaging. It was genuinely extraordinary, these insulated pouches using a phase change material he'd been tinkering with for months. Basically the same physics as those hand warmers you crack and shake, but operating in reverse. Cold for hours, flat packable, fully recyclable. He filed the patent from our kitchen table while eating leftover pad thai from the place on Irving Park with the green awning. It's a laundromat now. I can still smell the peanut sauce when I think about those early days. We incorporated in February. I remember driving to the Secretary of State's business filing office and standing in line behind a woman registering a dog grooming business. She was beaming. She kept telling the clerk about her golden doodle and how she'd always dreamed of working with animals. The clerk was nodding politely but clearly not absorbing a single word. I wondered quietly if that woman's family had laughed at her too. The first 6 months were a blur of things I had never done before and had no idea how to do. I'd never raised capital, I'd never negotiated a commercial partnership, I'd never pitched to anyone who had the actual power to say yes. Marcus handled the product side, the packaging, the supply chain architecture, the relationships with food suppliers. I handled everything else, which in practice meant I handled the things that made me want to physically throw up. Our first pitch meeting was at a coffee shop on Division Street. I was meeting a man named Victor Huang who ran a small angel fund. I'd found him through LinkedIn, which is embarrassing to admit, but that's the reality of not having pre-existing connections. Victor arrived 20 minutes late, ordered an espresso, and listened to me pitch for approximately 4 minutes before he said, "How are you different from every other meal kit out there?" I explained. The logistics, the pickup model, the cold pack technology. He held up one hand. How are you different in a way the customer actually cares about, not the logistics? What does the customer feel? I didn't have a clean answer, not then. Victor didn't invest, but he gave me something worth considerably more than money, though I couldn't see it in the moment. He said, "You've built this from the inside out. The engineering, the supply chain efficiency metrics, that's fine. But you need to also build it from the outside in. What does the person holding your box feel when she picks it up?" I thought he was being condescending. I went home and complained to Marcus about it for an entire hour. Marcus listened the way he always does, and then he said, "He's right, though." I didn't speak to Marcus for the rest of that evening. Not in anger, exactly. I just needed to sit inside the uncomfortable truth that I'd spent 8 months building something and might have been constructing it from entirely the wrong direction. We were consuming our savings at an alarming rate. Marcus was still at his company at this point, so we had his salary, but I'd stopped earning entirely, and we'd already sunk $60,000 into Harvest Table. $60,000. I'd lie awake doing math in my head. At our current burn rate, we had maybe 10 months before things became genuinely catastrophic. This is the moment in the story where I should tell you who my family actually is. Not the Thanksgiving scene, but who they are as people. My parents, Raymond and Gloria Kowalczyk, live in a suburb of Chicago in the same split-level mansion they purchased in 1986. My father worked for a waste management company for 31 years. Not the executive side. He drove a route, then supervised routes, then managed a dispatch office. He retired with a pension and a bad knee. My mother worked part-time doing billing at a pediatric dental office. They are not wealthy people. They are not impoverished people. They are the kind of people who have a finished basement with a pool table nobody uses and a deep freezer full of Costco chicken. They are also, the kind of people who believe the world operates according to certain rules, and that deviating from those rules is not brave, it's reckless. My father's version of a dream was purchasing a used fishing boat from a man in Wisconsin. He named it Early Exit, even though he was 63 when he bought it. My mother's version of a dream was adding a sunroom to the house, which she did in 2019 with a contractor who did a perfectly fine job except that the windows fog up whenever it rains. I love them. I need you to understand that everything I'm about to tell you exists on top of the bedrock of the fact that I love my parents and my sister, and I believe at the core of it that they love me. Sandra is 3 years older than me. She married a man named Greg who manages an auto parts store in the suburbs. They have 2 kids. Sandra works as a reading specialist at an elementary school. She is the family's designated responsible one, a role she never volunteered for and has complicated feelings about, though she would never actually say so out loud. When I announced I was launching a company, I think Sandra's silence wasn't disapproval. I think it was fear. She was afraid for me. That's a different thing entirely. I wish I'd understood the difference sooner. Back to the business. After Victor Huang dismantled my pitch in 4 minutes, I spent 3 weeks completely rethinking our positioning. I brought in a contact of a contact, a woman named Priya Singh who had worked in marketing at a major food delivery company before it was acquired. Priya was not gentle. She looked at our brand identity, which I'd assembled myself using a free design tool because I was desperately trying to conserve money, and said, "This looks like a flyer for a dentist's waiting room." I said, "That bad?" She said, "Dana, you have a stock photo avocado that looks like it was downloaded from the first page of a Google image search." Priya helped us completely rebuild the brand. She did it in exchange for 1% equity, which felt meaningful at the time and turned out to be extraordinarily meaningful later. She came up with the tagline, "Dinner Handled," and redesigned everything in warm, muted tones that made our packaging look like it belonged in an upscale food magazine. She also, critically, helped me completely rewrite the pitch. The new pitch led with the customer. Specifically, it opened with a woman named Nina. Nina was fictional, but she was built from roughly 30 real conversations I'd had with actual women, mostly mothers in the western suburbs who desperately wanted to cook real food for their families, but were exhausted by the existing options. The frozen food aisle made them feel guilty. Nina wanted something in between. Real food, minimal effort, no shame attached. I told Nina's story at our next pitch meeting, which took place at a venture fund's office in downtown Chicago. The kind of space with exposed brick walls and a kombucha tap in the break room. The partner I was presenting to was a woman named Elaine Voss, late 40s, silver rings on almost every finger. She listened to the entire pitch without interrupting once. When I finished, she said, "Tell me about the cold chain." I nearly cried on the spot. She'd heard the customer story and immediately wanted to understand how we'd actually deliver on the promise. That was the first moment someone took us seriously in a way that had a dollar figure attached. Elaine's fund led our seed round, $400,000. I remember signing the term sheet at a Panera on LaSalle Street because our apartment was too chaotic and we didn't yet have an office. I ordered green tea and a cinnamon bagel. Marcus ordered black coffee. Elaine ordered nothing and observed us sign with the posture of someone who had witnessed this ritual 100 times. I called my mother that night. I don't fully know why. Maybe I needed to hear her say she was proud of me? I told her about the funding, trying to keep my voice casual like it wasn't a monumental thing. She said, "That's nice, honey. Your father wants to know if you're coming to Easter." "Mom, I just raised $400,000. I heard you. That is a lot of money. Are you coming to Easter?" "Yes, I'm coming to Easter." "Good. Bring that spinach dip." That was the entire conversation. No follow-up questions, no "how does this work" or "what happens next?" Just spinach dip. Maybe she said something else and I've compressed the memory into its most painful shape. Memories do that. They curdle toward the hurt. But that's what I remember. We used the seed funding to hire 3 people, a fulfillment coordinator, a part-time developer, and Priya full-time. We signed our first grocery partner, a small regional chain with 12 suburban locations. We launched in September 2018 with 4 meal options per week. Marcus left his corporate job in October. And that's when the noodle phase truly began. Not immediately we had his savings as a buffer, but within a few months, because here's the thing about a startup that nobody tells you until you're inside one: money arrives in lumps and departs in a continuous river. We'd receive a batch of funding or a good revenue week, and then it would drain away into rent, ingredients, packaging, payroll, and 100 other costs I hadn't budgeted for because I hadn't known they existed, like liability insurance for food businesses, like the expense of a USDA inspection, like the fact that Marcus's phase change cold packs had to be independently laboratory tested, and just the testing alone cost $9,000. Marcus and I were paying ourselves nothing. We had our mortgage, his student loans, my car payment. We cut everything. No restaurants, no new clothing, no travel. We canceled our gym memberships. I remember this specifically because the staff member at the front desk tried to upsell me on a membership freeze, and I had to explain that no, I didn't want to freeze it, I wanted to cancel it, and he literally could not locate the cancellation option in his computer system, which felt like the universe's little metaphor for the whole situation. We ate a lot of instant noodles, not in a charming, carefree young people way. We were in our early 30s with a mortgage, eating sodium-drenched ramen on the couch while watching cooking competition shows on cable, which in retrospect was a form of self-inflicted torture because we were genuinely hungry and those contestants were producing beautiful, elaborate food. There were nights I sat alone in our car in the garage, engine off, not going anywhere, just sitting, the faint glow from the garage door opener casting a dim yellow light. I'd hold my phone and scroll through nothing in particular. I wasn't sad, exactly. I was in some state that existed beyond sadness, where you've exhausted the entire vocabulary for how you feel, and you're simply a body occupying a seat. Marcus found me out there one night. He opened the passenger door and sat down without saying anything. After about 5 silent minutes, he said, "I think we need to try the chicken kit with a different rice variety." I almost laughed. "Marcus, the jasmine rice is too sticky. I think basmati would work better." I know, like really know, the way I know we're borderline broke. I know that too, but the rice is still wrong. And he was right. We switched to basmati and the customer ratings on that kit climbed from 3.8 stars to 4.4. Sometimes the answer really is just rice. Here's where the first major twist comes in. Or maybe twist is the wrong word. Maybe it's just what happened, but it changed everything. In March 2019, our fulfillment coordinator, I'll call him Brandon, came to me and said, "Dana, we have a problem, a shrinkage problem." He meant theft. Product was disappearing somewhere between our prep kitchen and the grocery stores. Not enormous quantities, maybe 5%, but 5% of an already razor-thin margin is the difference between surviving and shutting down. I went to the grocery chain's regional manager, a man named Philip Hartwell, who I'd worked closely with for 6 months and believed was genuinely on our side. Philip sat me down in his office. His desk had a family photo from a theme park and a football-shaped stress ball, and told me, "Beth, I've investigated this, and I believe the issue originates on your end." Our end? Your delivery drivers. Maybe one of them is, "We use your receiving dock. The product is fine when it leaves our kitchen. It's fine on the truck. The loss starts after it enters your stores." He went very still. "I'm not comfortable with what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm reading the numbers." He ended the meeting. The following week, the grocery chain dropped 2 of our 12 store locations, citing underperformance. The 2 locations they cut were our highest volume stores. I was furious. I was also terrified because losing those locations meant losing roughly 20% of our revenue, which we absolutely could not afford. Marcus and I had one of our real fights that night, the kind where you're not actually arguing about what you think you're arguing about. I said he never should have left his job. He said I was the one who asked him to. I said I hadn't asked, I had suggested. He said, "Dana, you handed me a spreadsheet showing exactly why it made financial sense for me to quit. That is not a suggestion. That is a business case." He was right about that too. We went to bed not speaking. In the morning, he was already in the garage working on a new cold pack iteration. I made coffee and brought him a cup. And we just picked back up where we'd left off, minus the crisis, plus caffeine. That's what long-term partnership looks like. You don't always resolve things cleanly. You just keep handing each other coffee. What I found out later, months later, too late to be useful but not too late to make me genuinely angry, was that Philip Hartwell had been orchestrating a small fraud operation. He had authorized store managers to log certain deliveries as damaged on arrival and then distribute the supposedly damaged product among employees. Our meal kits, along with products from other vendors, were being systematically walked out by store staff. I discovered this because one of the store managers, a woman named Teresa, called me completely out of nowhere in July 2019. She said, "I don't know if you remember me, but I ran the harvest table section at one of the locations." I told her I remembered. "I don't work there anymore. I was let go. I don't want to get into all of it, but the real reason is I started asking too many questions about the damaged goods write-offs." She told me everything. Philip had built a system where managers would flag deliveries as damaged and then redistribute the product among employees. She estimated it was happening at 8 of our 12 partner locations. I asked her why she was telling me this. She said because when I tried to report it internally, nobody believed me. I figured you deserved to know. I wanted to do something. Sue them. File a formal complaint. Something. But Marcus, practical, maddening, correct Marcus, said quietly, "We can't afford a lawyer, Dana. We can't afford the time. We have to move on." That is profoundly not fair. No, it isn't, but fair doesn't cover our mortgage this month. So we moved on. I filed a detailed written report to the chain's corporate headquarters. I never received a single response. Not a form letter, not an acknowledgement, nothing. And some nights, I still think about Teresa, who lost her job for doing the right thing. After that experience, we had to pivot our entire strategy. Priya, who by this point had evolved from a marketing hire into something closer to a co-strategist, which she was absolutely not compensated enough for, suggested something I hadn't considered. "What about corporate accounts?" she said one afternoon. "Companies, organizations that want to feed their employees real food but don't want to deal with catering logistics." This was late 2019, the pre-pandemic world. Remember offices? Remember when the hottest workplace debate was whether open floor plans were productive or soul-crushing? Priya saw a gap I had completely missed. Companies were spending enormous amounts on catering and meal benefits, and most of the options were identical: pizza, sandwich platters, limp salads, and plastic clamshells. Our kits could be different. Individual portions, customizable, genuinely high quality, stored in the office kitchen and available whenever someone was actually hungry rather than at a mandatory scheduled lunch hour. We ran a trial with a technology company in River North. 50 employees, 2 weeks of harvest table kits. The feedback was remarkable. The office manager called me personally to extend the trial and said, "My team is actually excited about lunch. That has never happened before." By December 2019, we had 8 corporate clients. Small ones, nobody you'd recognize, but they paid consistently. Revenue was climbing. We were still eating noodles, but maybe twice a week now, instead of every night. I bought myself a new pair of jeans from Target, which felt like an extravagance. And then the world ended. March 2020. COVID. Offices closed overnight. All 8 of our corporate clients paused their accounts within 2 weeks. I watched our revenue collapse from its highest point in the company's history to essentially zero in the span of time it takes to finish a season of a streaming show. I don't want to linger too long on the pandemic because everyone carries a pandemic story and they all start to sound alike after a while. But here's what I'll say. There were 3 days in March 2020 when I genuinely did not know if we would survive. Not the company, but Marcus and me. Financially, emotionally, as a couple. We were locked inside our house with no income, no clients, a business that had suddenly lost its entire market, and approximately $11,000 in the bank. Marcus processed it differently than I did. He went quiet and retreated into the garage for 8 to 10 hours at a time. I assumed he was working on the packaging or the cold pack design. It turned out he was rebuilding an old motorcycle he'd found at an estate sale. He said he needed to work with his hands on something completely separate from the business. I told him that felt like avoidance. He said reality wasn't going anywhere and he'd engage with it when the spark plugs were clean. We didn't fight about it. We were simply too exhausted. Meanwhile, I was doing what I always do when I'm scared. I was building spreadsheets, modeling scenarios. What if we caught our team down to one person? What if I returned to commercial real estate part-time? What if we wound the whole thing down? How much would it cost to shut down cleanly? I had a tab in my spreadsheet literally labeled End State Scenario, and it showed we'd owe roughly $40,000 in lease termination fees and severance obligations. It was Priya who rescued us. Again, she FaceTimed me in April 2020, and I remember she had a music poster on the wall behind her in her apartment, and I thought about how strange it was to be discussing the potential death of our company with that album cover looking over her shoulder. She said, "Dana, everyone is cooking at home right now." I said, "I know." She said, "No, I mean everyone. People who have never cooked before. People are making sourdough bread from scratch. Meal kit show viewership is at record highs. Blue Apron stock is up 300%. I said, "Good for them." She said, "Listen to me. The grocery pickup model is dead, but direct-to-consumer shipping is absolutely back, and we have something that nobody else has." What? Marcus's cold pack. She was right. Without Priya Singh being right at the precise moment I was closest to quitting, there is no harvest table. I think about that constantly. We pivoted to direct-to-consumer shipping. Marcus's cold pack technology meant we could ship anywhere in the continental United States with a 36-hour window, completely unprecedented. Most meal kits at the time were limited to an 18-hour cold window, which meant they could only viably serve certain geographic areas. We could reach everywhere. We launched the new model in May 2020. Marcus and I packed the first 200 boxes ourselves in our garage at 2 in the morning, listening to a playlist he'd built that consisted entirely of deep cuts from a classic rock artist he has complicated opinions about. The orders came slowly at first, 50 per week, then 100, then 500. Priya ran a social media campaign that went modestly viral, a customer's video of someone opening our kit and saying, with genuine surprise, "Wait, this is actually really good." 2 million views. We didn't make that video, a customer did. She has no idea she helped save our company. By August 2020, we were processing 2,000 orders per week. By December, 5,000. We hired 15 people. We moved into a proper commercial kitchen in a space that used to be a bakery and still carried a faint ghost of sourdough even after we scrubbed every surface. I finally paid myself a salary, $42,000 a year, which for the founder of a company doing seven-figure revenue was laughable. But after 2 years of nothing, it felt like the whole world opening up. Marcus and I went to a genuinely fancy restaurant for the first time in 2 years. We couldn't really afford it, but Priya insisted we do one thing that felt properly absurd as a celebration. I remember sitting across from Marcus at that candlelit table, watching the servers present these tiny, meticulously constructed dishes, and I started crying. Not because of the food, because I was sitting across from a man who had walked away from a stable career because I'd shown him a spreadsheet, and we'd eaten cheap noodles on the couch for 2 years straight. And now someone was placing an edible flower on a plate in front of me. And everything was simultaneously absurd and beautiful, and I couldn't tell if I was grateful or permanently changed by the hardship. Marcus held my hand across the table. Then he said, "The risotto is underseasoned." I laughed until the couple at the next table glanced over. That is the truest thing I can tell you about who Marcus is. He will hold your hand and critique the food in the exact same breath. Now, before I get to the acquisition, I need to stop here for a second, because if you are someone sitting in a garage right now, packing boxes, eating cheap food, watching your savings disappear, feeling that specific weight that exists beyond sadness, this part of the story is for you. We almost quit, multiple times. The pandemic nearly finished us. A grocery chain executive nearly robbed us into bankruptcy. We went to sleep not speaking to each other more nights than I want to count. And none of that is glamorous. None of it gets mentioned in the magazine profile. But it was real and it was survivable. And if you are in it right now, keep going. And if this story has meant something to you, if you've been sitting here nodding along because you know this specific kind of tired, please take 1 second to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment below telling me where you are in your own story. Are you in the ramen phase, the pivot phase, the I almost quit phase? Your comment genuinely matters, and it helps a small creator like me keep telling these kinds of stories. We're building something here too. Now, back to ours. In 2021, things accelerated at a pace that felt almost violent in its suddenness. We raised a Series A, $3.5 million. We expanded to a second commercial kitchen in another city. We brought on a COO named Marcus. No, wait, that's confusing. I'll call him Derek Pruitt, who had run operations at a large meal kit competitor and who both my Marcus and I liked immediately because in his interview he said, "I'm not going to pretend the meal kit industry isn't mostly built on bad unit economics, but you two have built something that actually makes sense, and I'd like to help it grow." Derek was the first person we hired whose salary exceeded ours. We paid him $150,000, below market rate, but he accepted it for the equity. He also had strong opinions about everything: the typography on our website, the temperature calibration in the kitchen, the way I ran our team meetings, which he said were too consensus-driven. I said that was called inclusion. He said it was called inefficiency. We argued about this constantly. He was almost always right. I didn't enjoy how consistently right he was, but the company ran better after he joined, and that's the only metric that ultimately matters. Here's the thing I haven't said yet, the thing that still keeps me awake sometimes. In the spring of 2021, I received a phone call from Sandra, not a text, an actual call. Sandra almost never calls. She's a texter, a just checking in with a smiley face kind of communicator. So when my phone rang and her name appeared on the screen, I already knew something was wrong. She told me our parents were having financial difficulties. My father's pension wasn't delivering what they'd anticipated, something related to a cost of living adjustment that hadn't materialized, and they'd taken out a home equity loan for the sunroom, and the payments were straining them. "It's just tight, Dana," Sandra said. I asked why they hadn't told me directly. Sandra was quiet for a moment. "You know why." I did know. They were proud, and they had laughed at me for starting a business, and now that business was succeeding, and asking me for help would require acknowledging something, I'm not sure exactly what. Maybe that they'd been wrong. Maybe that caution doesn't always protect you. Or maybe nothing that grand. Maybe they were simply two people in their 60s who didn't want their daughter to see them struggling. 2 months later, my father called me. My father never calls. He texts occasionally, one-line messages, no punctuation, like, got your mother a new bird feeder, or the heating unit needs looking at. But he called. He said, with enormous effort packed into every syllable, Dana, your mother and I were wondering if you might be able to help us with something. We need a loan, just until we get the home equity situation refinanced, maybe $30,000. The way he said the word loan, the weight of it, like he was carrying something heavy just by letting the word exist in the air between us. I could hear my mother in the background, not speaking, which meant she was standing right there listening. I told him it was fine, told him to let me handle it. He said again with quiet dignity, "It's a loan, Dana. We'll pay it back. I want that to be clear." I sent them $35,000, five more than he asked for, because I knew their property taxes were also coming due. My father texted back 2 words, "Received. Thank you." My mother called the next day, and we talked for 20 minutes about her neighbor's new fence and an HOA dispute she was involved in. She did not mention the money. They have not repaid it. It has been years now. I don't expect them to. I don't want them to. But the word loan sits between us like an object nobody will pick up and move. Meanwhile, the company kept growing. By the end of 2021, we were processing 40,000 orders per week across 4 cities. By mid-2022, we'd raised a Series B, $22 million at a valuation that made me feel like I was inhabiting someone else's life. 160 employees, a feature in a major newspaper's product recommendations. Marcus's cold pack engineering had been the subject of a published article in a technical journal I couldn't fully understand, but he was enormously proud of it, so I had it framed and mounted in our office. And winning, linger on this word, felt different than I'd imagined it would. In the difficult years, I'd fantasized about success the way you fantasize about a vacation, all highlights, no lines. The reality was that success meant more problems, not fewer. Larger problems, more expensive problems, problems that required attorneys. We had a trademark dispute with a similarly named company that cost us $80,000 to resolve. We had an employee who had falsified their credentials, and we didn't catch it for 4 months. We had a batch of kits ship with mislabeled allergen information. Nobody was harmed, thank everything, but the recall cost us $100,000, and I did not sleep properly for a full week. Derek handled most of the operational fires. Marcus managed the product side. I managed strategy, fundraising, and external relations, which meant I spent considerable time on video calls with investors discussing scalability and addressable markets and other vocabulary that shifts meaning depending entirely on who is speaking it. I also managed the thing nobody prepares you for when you become a CEO, the loneliness. You can't voice your fears to your employees because they need you to project confidence. You can't fully unload on your partner because he is also inside the same storm. You can't talk to your family because they don't understand the landscape of what you're navigating. You can talk to your therapist, who is genuinely helpful, but bills by the hour. There's a moment from 2022 I return to often. We were at a company meeting, around 80 people in the room, and Derek was presenting quarterly numbers. Revenue was up 40% quarter over quarter. He put up a slide showing the growth curve, and the room cheered. Someone in the back actually whistled. And I looked around at all those people whose livelihoods depended on the decisions Marcus and I made, and I felt a terror so complete that I had to excuse myself. I stood at the bathroom sink with both hands on the cold porcelain and stared at my own reflection and thought, if I get this wrong, 160 families feel it. I didn't sign up for this. I signed up to make meal kits. I splashed water on my face and walked back out. Marcus caught my eye from across the room and mouthed silently, "You okay?" I nodded. He didn't believe me. He let it go because we were in public, and that's what you do. The acquisition. I'll get to it. But first, Sandra. Sandra and I had always shared a closeness that didn't require explanation. Not because we were similar, but because we'd grown up in the same house, and that creates a bond that doesn't need articulating. We knew which floorboards creaked. We knew that our father went silent when he was angry and our mother went loud. We knew the precise shade of guilt our mother could generate with a single, carefully chosen sentence. After the money situation with our parents, something shifted between Sandra and me. Not suddenly, gradually, like a photograph left in sunlight. She texted less. When I called, she was always in the middle of something. At family gatherings, she was polite but distant, like someone you're professionally friendly with but wouldn't call in a crisis. I understood what it was, finally, at Christmas 2022, the last full family Christmas we've had together. We were at my parents' house, the same ornaments on the same tree, including one I'd made in fourth grade out of popsicle sticks and glitter that should have been retired 20 years ago, but persists because my mother attaches sentimental value to everything. I was in the kitchen helping with dinner when Sandra appeared in the doorway and asked if we could talk privately. We went to the sunroom, the one with the windows that fog when it rains. It was raining, the glass was completely fogged. We stood inside it like we were enclosed in a cloud. Sandra said, very carefully, "I need you to know that I'm proud of you." I said, "Thank you." She said, "And I need you to know that it's hard." "What's hard?" "Being the sister of the person who did the impossible thing. Mom and Dad talk about you now. Did you know that? Not to you, to other people. Dad told his fishing friend his daughter sold 1 million meal kits. Mom told the HOA board member you were featured in the newspaper. They tell strangers and they cannot say it to your face. And I've been here the entire time, doing my job, raising my children, being fine. And being fine doesn't get you mentioned at the homeowners association meeting." She wasn't crying. Sandra doesn't cry. Her jaw went tight and her voice became very measured, like someone reading a prepared statement. She said, "I'm not asking you to fix this. I'm not saying it's your fault. I just needed to say it, because if I'm not honest with you, what's the point?" I said I was sorry. She said I didn't need to be. She went back to the kitchen and started on the side dish. We've never discussed it again. That conversation sits inside my chest like a stone, because Sandra was right. She had done everything right. Steady career, wonderful children, reliable, present, the person everyone calls when they actually need something. And the reward for doing everything right is that nobody celebrates it. Nobody makes a fuss about the woman who shows up every day, does her work, loves her family, and doesn't burn her life down to build something extraordinary from the wreckage. There is no viral moment for that. No Series B, no newspaper feature. I think about this often, whether what Marcus and I did was genuinely brave or just profoundly selfish, whether eating noodles for 2 years was admirable or reckless, whether the fact that it worked out means it was the right choice, or whether we simply got lucky and have been narrating it as destiny when really it was just variance. I honestly don't know. The acquisition moved faster than I expected. In early 2024, we started receiving what Derek called sniffs, casual conversations from larger companies who were clearly evaluating us without wanting to say so directly. A major food conglomerate took me to lunch and spent 90 minutes discussing synergies, which is a word that means we want to acquire you, but we're not ready to admit it yet. The serious conversation began in May 2024 with a company I'm not permitted to name due to a confidentiality agreement, but I can tell you they are Fortune 500 level. They make things you've consumed this week. Their team flew to Chicago, 3 people in suits who smiled at appropriate intervals and asked very specific questions about our technology, our supply chain, and our customer retention data. Marcus walked them through the cold pack system. Derek walked them through fulfillment operations. I delivered the vision pitch, where Harvest Table could be in 5 years, what the market landscape was going to look like, why our positioning was structurally defensible. After they departed, Derek said flatly, "They're going to make an offer." I asked how he could be confident. He said, "The woman with the binder had color-coded tabs. You don't color-code your binder tabs for a company you're not serious about acquiring." Chuckled softly. The first offer came in June, $35 million. I won't pretend I wasn't tempted. $35 million when 5 years ago I couldn't afford a gym membership. But Elaine, our first investor, the woman who believed in us before almost anyone else, said simply, "Don't take it. Elaine, it's $35 million. And the company is worth more. They know that. That offer is designed to see if you'll accept it before you understand what you actually have." We negotiated for 2 months. I lost weight during those 2 months. Not intentionally, just from the sustained stress of knowing that each conversation could be the one that sealed everything or destroyed it. The final number was $50 million. 50. I have to write it in words rather than numerals because even now it doesn't feel like a real number. It feels like something that belongs to someone else, someone fundamentally different from a girl who grew up watching her father leave for work at 5 in the morning. The day we signed, Marcus and I went home and sat on our couch, the same couch where we'd eaten noodles and watched cooking competitions, and we didn't speak for a long time. The television was off, the house was completely quiet. Marcus said eventually, "I think we should get a new couch." I said, "This one has a noodle stain." He said he knows. We still have it. We will probably always have it, because getting rid of it would mean losing proof that the hard part happened, and the hard part is the part that actually matters. The money changed things with my family, but not the way you'd expect. It didn't repair anything. If anything, it illuminated the existing fractures, the way turning up the lights in a room suddenly shows you every crack in the plaster. My parents began calling more frequently after the sale. Not dramatically more, but more. The conversations took on a new texture, a kind of weightedness. My mother would mention things she'd like to do to the house, new windows, a new roof, maybe a small hot tub. Not directly asking for money, just mentioning, just leaving the information suspended in the space between us, like laundried on a line. My father asked for another loan in late 2024, $20,000 this time, for a medical procedure that insurance covered only partially. I sent it without extended discussion. Again, the word loan. Again, no concrete repayment plan. Again, a text that said, "Received, thank you." Then my mother asked, not for herself, but for Sandra. Sandra's car had suffered a major mechanical failure, and the repair bill was going to be $4,000. My mother called and said she hated to ask, but Sandra and Greg were stretched thin, and could I help? I told her immediately yes and to stop apologizing. She went quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We're so proud of you, Dana." And she started crying. And I started crying. And we sat on the phone together crying and not speaking, which is perhaps the most genuinely honest conversation my mother and I have ever had. But here's the thing that gnaws at me. My parents are proud of me now because I have money. They were not proud of me when I had the idea. They were not proud of me when I had the courage. They were not proud of me when I was packing boxes in a garage at 2 in the morning. They're proud of me because the number on the check became large enough that the pride finally felt safe. And I don't know entirely what to do with that. I don't know if that's a universal human thing, to only fully believe in someone after the evidence has become impossible to ignore, or if it represents some failure of imagination or love that I can't quite name. Maybe it's neither. Maybe my parents were frightened the entire time, and their laughter and their indifference were just fear dressed up in different clothing. Maybe when my father made that small exhale at the Thanksgiving table in 2017, he wasn't dismissing me. He was terrified. Terrified that his daughter was about to do something that might destroy her, and he had no language for that fear, so instead he exhaled through his nose and looked back at the football game. I want to believe that version. Some days I do. There's one more thread I need to pull. Priya Singh, who had redesigned our brand and saved us during the pandemic, and who had been woven into the fabric of Harvest Table almost from the beginning. Priya and I had a falling out during the acquisition. When Northbridge made their initial approach, I brought the deal to our board and to our core team. Priya was in that room. She held 1% equity, which on a $50 million sale represented $500,000 before taxes, a genuinely meaningful amount of money by any standard. But during the negotiation, as the offer climbed from 35 to 40 to 45 million, Priya asked if we could renegotiate her 1% equity stake. I understood the impulse completely. She had taken 1% when the company was worth effectively nothing. Without Priya Singh, there is no harvest table. I know that. I have always known it. But renegotiating one person's equity during an active acquisition would open a door I couldn't close. Derek would have grounds to request more. Our early employees would expect similar treatment. The investors would push back. The deal itself could collapse. I told Priya this across my office desk, and I watched her expression change. She said, "So that's it." I said her 1% was worth $500,000. She said she knew exactly what it was worth. She also knew what she was worth. I know what you're worth. That's not the issue. Then what is the issue? The issue is that I cannot restructure one person's terms without restructuring everyone's, and if I do that, this deal might not close, and then your 1% is worth nothing again. She looked at me. There was a particular silence in that room that had genuine texture, like the air itself was holding its breath. Then she said, "You wouldn't have a company without me." I know. You'd probably be back leasing office space somewhere downtown, and you're telling me 1% is the appropriate measure of that contribution? I didn't have a clean answer. She was right. I was also right, and both of those things couldn't occupy the same space simultaneously. Priya accepted her $500,000 when the deal closed. She attended the closing dinner, she shook everyone's hand, she was gracious and warm and said all the right things. She posted something generous about it publicly. But she hasn't returned any of my calls since October. I've left 3 voicemails, I've sent 2 texts, nothing. I don't know if I made the right call. I think about it every day. I protected the deal, which protected 160 employees and their families, which was the responsible thing to do, but I may have lost one of the most important people in my life in the process. And the most difficult part is, I don't know if I'd decide differently if I could go back. I think I'd make the same choice. I think I'd live with the same regret. There's a version of this story where everything resolves cleanly, where my parents and I have a cathartic reconciliation and they say they were wrong and I forgive them and we embrace in the sunroom, where Sandra and I go to lunch and she tells me the weight has lifted, where Priya calls me back and we laugh about the whole complicated mess, where I stand somewhere and declare that I proved them all wrong. That's not what happened. My parents call more than they used to. We talk about ordinary things. We don't discuss the loans or Thanksgiving 2017 or the years of quiet indifference. We've agreed, without ever saying so, to build a new path around the wreckage rather than through it. Sandra and I text more than we did last year. She sent me a photo of her daughter's school science project, a model of the solar system built from foam balls and pipe cleaners. I sent back a heart. That is where we are. Heart emojis and styrofoam planets. Marcus and I are well. He has started a new project in the garage. He won't tell me what it is. I can hear Springsteen drifting under the door. The old couch is still in the living room. The coffee mug with the chipped handle, the one that reads "Dinner Handled," sits on my desk every single morning. 2 days ago, I was sitting with my parents in their sunroom. It was raining. My father was reading the newspaper on his tablet, squinting because he refuses to increase the font size. My mother was working through a word search from a book she bought at the dollar store. I was just sitting there, listening to rain against the fogged glass. My father looked up. He said, "Dana, do you remember that Thanksgiving when you told us about the business?" My heart stopped. "Yeah, Dad, I remember." He nodded. He looked back at his tablet. Then, without looking up, he said, "I was wrong about that." My mother kept working her word search. I watched the rain on the glass. That was everything he said. I drove home with the radio off, and somewhere on the highway, 2 lanes over, I saw a waste management truck in the same green and yellow I grew up watching pull out of our driveway at 5 in the morning. I watched it take the exit toward home, and I kept driving.